Here is a question worth taking seriously. The honest answer has been changing fast. The best models in the world live in the cloud, behind an API, and a meter that never stops running. Along with that capability, you also rent the vendor lock-in, the rate limits, and a quiet privacy trade where your private seed code becomes part of someone else's product. So the real question is not whether a hosted frontier model is smart. We already know that it is. The question is whether an open model running on hardware you own and control can do genuinely useful agentic work inside a real code base. Not a polished demo on a toy problem. The messy reality of reading a file, running a tool, editing the code, catching its own mistake, and trying it. The honest answer is that it depends far less on the raw model than most people assume. It depends much more on the fee system you build around it. The guardrails that catch its errors and the evals that score its output matter more than the weights. Let me show you what that actually looks like when it runs on a single machine. Start with the hardware because the constraints shape everything else. This whole system runs on a single desktop box with well over 100 gigabytes of unified memory shared between the processor and the graphics chip. That one number is the entire budget, and every model has to fit inside it. On that machine, a QN model does the reasoning and writes the actual code edits. A fish speech model, the very one narrating this video right now, produces the voice you are hearing. Alongside them sit smaller vision and audio models whose only job is to judge the work. Nothing here calls an external service, and no tokens ever leave the machine. In terms of raw capability, that is obviously a limitation, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. A frontier model in the cloud is simply more capable than what fits on one box. But running everything locally also changes the economics in a way that turns out to matter more than the capability gap. Hold that thought, because it is the hinge the whole argument turns on, and it comes back hard at the end. An open model left entirely alone will do the wrong thing with total confidence and never flinch. So the first rule is simple. You do not trust it. You fence it in. Components talk to each other through typed contracts, not loose shell commands. So a malformed output gets caught right at the seam instead of quietly corrupting 3 steps later. When the voice model drops a word mid-sentence, a separate speech recognition pass hears the gap and forces that line to regenerate. When a rendered clip fails a quality check, the loop automatically tightens its own settings and tries again. The model is allowed to be unreliable precisely because the harness wrapped around it is not. That inversion is the entire trick. You stop pouring effort into making the model perfect, and you start making failure cheap to absorb, easy to see, and simple to recover from. Once that clicks, a weaker model with strong guardrails will reliably beat a stronger model running completely blind. You cannot ship what you cannot measure, and vibes simply do not survive contact with a real pipeline. So in this system, everything gets scored automatically every single time. Some of that scoring is pure objective signal processing that measures the actual waveform, because a clever model judge will happily call a clip perfect while it has quietly dropped a word you can prove is missing. Some of it is a panel of separate model judges that vote, so that no single opinion ever gets to decide on its own. And the sharpest checks of all are adversarial. Instead of politely asking whether something looks good, you hand it to a skeptic whose entire job is to prove that it is broken, and you keep only the findings that survive the attack. That mixture is what turns a noisy pile of model outputs into something you can genuinely trust. The lesson underneath is counterintuitive. The judges that earn their keep are the deterministic, cheap, and boring ones that just measure reality without an opinion. The expensive, clever model that mostly nods along is the one you should trust the very least. Here is where local finally earns its keep. In the cloud, you pay for every token, which means each retry and each extra judge shows up as a real line on the bill. So naturally, you ration them. You end up verifying far less than you should, simply because the meter is always running. On hardware you own, the marginal cost of generating something one more time is basically zero. The only real question is whether the graphics chip happens to be busy right now. That single change flips the the entire strategy on its head. Now you can afford to generate 6 different takes of a line and quietly keep the one clean version. A full panel of judges can replace a single nervous check. The loop can keep retrying until it actually lands. The quality you end up with is not really a story about the model being brilliant. It is a story about spending compute freely on guardrails, on evals, because spending that compute genuinely does not hurt you. Scarcity makes you cut corners. Abundance lets you verify everything without a second thought. Let's be honest, this is not a solved problem. Open models running locally are not the frontier, and the gap shows up in the subtle places. A word slightly mispronounced. A single token quietly dropped from an otherwise clean sentence. The harness is genuinely excellent at catching catastrophic failures, the kind that fail loudly, like a missing word or a sudden patch of dead silence. But the small perceptual stuff, the thing a careful human catches in a fraction of a second, that often slips right past every automatic check you can build. So the real skill here is not blind, total automation. It's knowing exactly which problems deserve a guardrail and which ones deserve a human ear. Automate aggressively against the things that fail loudly and leave an obvious trace in the data. Keep a person in the loop for the things that fail quietly and leave nothing for a machine to grab onto. Get that division of labor right, and the whole system starts to feel genuinely reliable instead of subtly frustrating. Can open self-hosted models do genuinely useful, agentic work inside a real codebase? Yes, they absolutely can. But notice what actually made it work, because that is the real lesson to take away. The model was never the product, the harness was. Guardrails made failure cheap, easy to recover from. Evils made quality concrete. You can see it and you can measure it instead of just arguing about it endlessly. And running it all on local hardware made both of those things affordable, enough to actually use without flinching. The weights are just one component sitting in the middle of the system. The machinery built around them is the real answer. If you want the proof, you have been listening to it this entire time. This whole video, the script and the voice and the checks that quietly caught and rejected the bad takes, was produced end to end on Fur, a single machine running open models with no cloud anywhere in the loop. That is the entire point. The frontier is impressive, genuinely impressive, but you do not always need it. You need a model that is good enough and a harness good enough to finally trust it.